All right, so we're going to get started. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. I understand there is a line of people downstairs still getting checked in, but we're not going to wait. I, I was going to start with a wonderful joke that I spent a lot of time preparing. But then I tested it on Lisa during the weekend, and she wouldn't laugh. So, so we're just going. So we're just going to go straight into it. This is the inaugural global summit of the Worldwide Supply Chain Federation, which is what we call ourselves. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. It all started in August of 2017. I had been a VC for a number of years, and I was casting around for an area to specialize in, and started studying trucking, and then I met Lisa in 2016, and we spent close to 2 hours talking about supply chain. She was talking about it from the perspective of the fashion industry, and I was looking at it from the perspective of trucking and shipping, and so on and so forth. And so we kept talking several times a week. And eventually I did some work, wrote 2 blog posts that were read by more people than I thought would read them. That led me to talking to startup founders and executives in the industry and academics as well. And I learned a couple of things. I learned that, one, I was looking at it all wrong, which is something that Lisa had told me the first time we met. She said, Brian, you shouldn't be focused on shipping and trucking, you should be focused on the supply chain. And I said, no, but it's shipping and trucking. She said, no, it's the supply. Anyway, so they said, you're looking at it wrong. It's not trucking or shipping or operations or whatever it is that you're excited about. It's the supply chain. And if you look at it from the perspective...
Show them the back of your shirt.
And if you look at it from the perspective, the back of my shirt says the world is a supply chain. And they said, if you look at it from the perspective of a supply chain, then the problems are even worse than you think they are, but that also means that the opportunity is more exciting than you think it is. And then they also said in the developing world, inefficiencies in supply chains probably lead to a hidden cost of something like 10 to 20%, some said 25% on society. And the thing that blew my mind is they said in the developing world, it could be as high as 70 or 80% of a hidden cost just due to inefficiencies in supply chains.
I'm skipping ahead in the slides.
And yeah, we had to freestyle because technology wouldn't let us show the slides. But then we had our second event. Go to the slide. Yeah. The second event. So this was our second event in January of 2018, where we talked about blockchain, and there was a gentleman from the United Nations who came. And so I was chatting with him, and I said, well, you're from the UN, so you should know this, but the economists I've spoken to have said there's no good data about this, but then they tell me that in the developing world, supply chain inefficiencies probably impose a cost of up to 80% on society. And he looked at me and smiled and said, don't quote me on this, but no one has good data, not even the UN, and 80% is highly optimistic. I said, what do you mean 80% is highly optimistic? You mean it's 100%? And he said, that's optimistic. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. You mean it's, what, 150%? And that really upset me because, like I said, I come from West Africa. I don't know if I said that yet. But I come from West Africa. I grew up I was born in Ghana. I grew up in Nigeria. That's me in the blue T-shirt, getting ready to go to high school. And so what I heard him saying was that my relatives, most of whom live in the village and most of whom live on less than $1 a day, were probably paying up to 200 or 300% more for the very, very basic things that they consume during the course of their life. that's what told me that this is what I should be working on. So what does that mean from my perspective? It meant, one, learn more about the problems, learn more about the opportunities, find a way to bring people together to work collectively to solve these problems, because trade is a global thing, supply chains are global things, technology is a global thing. The well-being of societies is a problem that everyone around the world is concerned about. Now, during the course of talking to all those startup people and academics and company executives, I noticed a dichotomy. I noticed that when I was talking to the executives, we call them the buyers, the people who want to buy new technology for supply chain, I noticed that they generally understood the business use cases of the technology that they were looking for extremely well. They also generally knew what is working great right now and doesn't need to be fixed extremely well. And they also had a sense of the problem areas where they wanted new technology and new innovations to help them out. What they did not know was, how far along has AI come? Is AI now at the point where it could really make a difference in solving the problems we have at our company? Because, back in the 90s, when there was a big boom in investing in supply chain innovation, the technology was not ready yet, and some of them got burned. And then blockchain, right? What blockchain should I be paying attention to? Which of the hundreds of startups that say the next greatest thing since sliced bread should I be paying attention to, and so on and so forth. And then on the other hand, when I was talking to the builders, the folks who are building the new technology, they tended to understand the technology extremely well, but didn't understand the business use case as well. And so it seemed very obvious to me that someone should have created a community that brought these people together, and I should go join that community and hang out with them and learn from them. It turns out no one had done that. So I thought, this is insane. We should start one. So I registered the page without thinking about it. The next day, someone the Mattermark Daily sent a message to 150,000 of its subscribers saying, Brian from KC Ventures is building this thing. And I panicked and I called Lisa. And I said, Lisa, you have to help me or I'm going to get egg on my face. Will you be my co-founder? So that's how we started that's how we started the community. We have 1,900 members in New York. About 50% of our members describe themselves as executives. This is our 15th event. On average, we have something like 120 plus people show up. At the picture you saw before, it was close to 180. The folks at SAP were in a panic. We couldn't have done this on our own. We have 10 co-organizers, and we're looking to recruit some more. We're active in New York and Charleston. Mike is going to be emceeing part of the day tomorrow. Around the world, there are 2,650 people. See, I still can't wrap my head around how quickly we've grown. There are 2,650 members around the world. So we have 8 communities in 5 countries: the United States, Canada, Greece, India, and I'm forgetting one. No, we don't have one, but that doesn't matter. We're hoping to open a few new chapters this year and get them active. The one that I think I'm most excited about is one in Silicon Valley, which we hope to launch in the fall. And we've had 670 new members join us in the last 90 days. And now I will turn things over to Lisa.
You're going to be my clicker?
Sure.
Oh, wait. I think it's frozen. There we go. I'm going to use your mic because this one doesn't seem to be so good. Hello. So this is me. I'm Lisa Morales-Hellibo. I'm one of the co-founders of the Worldwide Supply Chain Federation. And that's me, the little girl wearing the drapes, my Von Trapp moment. This is one of the reasons why I also became obsessed with supply chain, specifically the fashion supply chain from a very early age. My parents are from Puerto Rico, and I come from a family of seamstresses. Puerto Rico, actually, a huge part of their local economy has historically been apparel manufacturing. So that's me, obsessed with fashion from very, very young, and you can see why Brian and I have similar interests in how supply chains impact emerging markets. So today we're going to talk about, I'm going to go through the 4 key factors currently impacting global supply chains. The first is the 4th Industrial Revolution. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but we have evolved, and it's largely because of 5G and cyber physical systems, IoT. The Internet of Things is changing the game as far as understanding where your products can live across the supply chain, because everything talks to everything else now. And second is our climate, global political climate. Trade wars. I don't know if you're familiar with what's going on, but things are getting a little heated. So right now, our current supply chains being globalized leave all the companies that are using globalized supply chains open to a lot of risk. Obviously, if you're going to have tariffs imposed, it's going to impact your pricing from your raw materials down to your end consumer, and we need to rethink agility and speed across our supply chains. Climate change is another big deal for supply chains because it's impacting crops, it's impacting human populations, leading to lots of immigrants, and there's only going to be more. So we need to figure out how to modify our supply chains so they can be far more resilient and agile. This is my favorite slide. So I was featured in a book last year called Disruptors, Success Strategies from Women Who Break the Mold. And I'm proud of my title now of being a disruptor. Innovation is where most companies live. They're at the back end of the arrow, and innovation really is just talking about incremental changes. We're at a time in history where, because of those 4 key factors I just showed you, we no longer have the luxury for incremental innovation. We're at a point in time where every company should be focused on their own disruption. And if you're not, you will be the disrupted. So we will be talking about 4 key segments across supply chain today that will explain how these innovations will disrupt you. Next. Fashion. I don't know how many people actually realize, but every single garment that you wear has been sewn by human hands, historically, throughout history. And now is the first time in history where we actually have technology, robotics, where full garments can be sewn without a human interaction. Massive potential disruption. Robots, more robots. Warehouses and logistics, obviously, including shipping and trucking, your autonomous vehicles, everything that can be roboticized is being roboticized. So what does that mean for your human labor? Are you going to upskill them? Are you going to retrain? What is the human cost on getting rid of all these jobs or displacing them? Blockchain, or actually maritime. This is one of the tracks we're doing today. The bill of lading, I think, is another amazing example. It's been paper since the dawn of time. You get on your ship in some other country, and you need an actual physical piece of paper to be able to receive your goods wherever you're landing. And that, for the first time, is being digitized with things like blockchain. So you can now have an authenticated, trusted, certified bill of lading that hasn't been brought via paper. And lastly, blockchain. Data, data, data. The world truly is a supply chain because of our data. And our data is more than just consumer-facing data. That tends to be what most enterprise companies focus on because it's sexy, it's flashy, it's easier to access because all of the consumers are giving you their data now. What's harder is actually to invest in the systems and innovations that will give you real-time data across your supply chain. And it will be every single node. So are you ready? And if not, you'll be disrupted. These are our 4 key areas of innovation that we like to focus on. We think these are the big, broad buckets of disruption that is going to impact the supply chain. And these categories also happen to align with our fund. So Brian and I are building Refashion Ventures. We invest in early stage companies that are refashioning global supply chains. And we are currently raising our fund, but today is about those innovations. If you could go back 1 slide. Next gen logistics, advanced materials, advanced manufacturing, and of course, data and predictive analytics. This is the future. Welcome. And last
slide. So one last thing. This wouldn't have happened without the help of a lot of people. Like I said at the beginning, we have to say a big thank you to Microsoft. They've given us this entire floor for 2 days, which is kind of incredible. They're also going to feed us at lunchtime, which is also incredible. We have to say a big thank you to Setlog, especially to Simone. Simone has been a big supporter since the beginning, and Setlog is the only financial sponsor for this event, and she said, "I will write you a check and no questions asked, no strings attached." It was amazing. Linda helped us wrangle together our act in terms of PR and media. You probably would not have heard about this without without the coaching that we got from Linda. And Push Story is going to capture all this on video so that we can share it with more people. So, thank you.
All right. Next up, do you have clear? How do I get out of this? It's your computer. Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Paul McCulloch, our keynote. Is he around here somewhere? Paul? There he is. Paul McCulloch. He is our keynote for today. You want a lavalier? Oh, okay. All right.
It hasn't downloaded yet, Lisa.
Oh, no. All right. Can you hook it up to mine? Bear with. Sorry. Technical details. So Paul is an attorney at a company called CyberLaw. And when I first met Paul, he also happens to be Puerto Rican. We were at an event talking about supply chains. And I said, wait, you do what? And he started to describe to me all the different interactions he's had with government legislation and regulations around global supply chains. There are massive new implications that are occurring when you have instantly digitized supply chain, data that is crossing imaginary boundaries from country to country that have different regulations and compliance on what is public versus private. So right now, his stories are going to blow your mind as to things that I hadn't even started to think about until I met him. Things like your paper bill of lading suddenly becoming digitized creates all kinds of opportunities and risks to make sure you're in compliance. Paul McCulloch.
And just testing. All right, cool. I just gave you, put a piece of paper on here that seems to have disappeared. There it is. Yeah, all right. So while you get that up and running, let me just give you a quick introduction, again, just building upon that. We did meet doing Puerto Rico disaster recovery. And I am an attorney at the New York City CyberLaw Group focusing on data, technology, cybersecurity, and privacy law. And we cover multiple jurisdictions around the world. For 3 years before that, I was the global VP of Intellectual Property and Technology Law, VP of Digital Compliance, and Global Committee Chief for Cybersecurity Compliance at JP Morgan. I'm a coder turned lawyer, and this is going to be an introduction about what's happening behind the scenes, because essentially all the systems that everyone's running, if it touches technology, you've got the technology and you've got the data. So it's the supply chain of data, essentially. And as soon as this gets up and running,
Sorry.
that's all right. I'll operate off my hard copy for now. Technology issues.
It wouldn't be a technology conference if we didn't have technology issues.
Oh boy. But all right, so first off, I'm impressed that they're starting off with a lawyer. Usually we come in at the end of the conversation, so this is good. Compliance tells you what the laws are. Lawyers tell you what to do when you get the laws wrong. So it's really good to start off. And let me just give you a good perspective, a healthy perspective on understanding technology law. Technology law is the practice of understanding the technology better than your counterparty and then offloading the liability or somehow getting rid of the liability and mitigating the risks. So I guess we'll just,
We've got it
oh, you've got it?
here. It's just not showing up on there now.
All right,
Swap
well,
screens.
it's coming up. So what we're going to start off with is basically a visual representation of the map of the conversation, and I'm going to go rather quickly. I speak very fast when I get into it, so if the caffeine's going to kick in, it should probably kick in right about now. So do you just want to hold up the laptop?
No, we're going to change computers.
All right. So basically what we're going to talk about is, thinking about it from the ground up, technology and data. So technology and data are governed by three components of technology, which are tools, architecture, and operations. And this is where the T.A.O of data comes up. Actually, in a conversation earlier, it was Brian that came up with the acronym. I had completely overlooked it. But the tools, architecture, and operations govern all technology systems, and then they're leveraged by companies to make sure they meet international and domestic compliance obligations. They can implement digital transformation, and they can promote innovation. So I'm just kind of going through the slides here, and then you'll see them.
We'll get it.
Come again?
We're almost there.
Okay. So in terms of data and technology in the supply chain, we're moving past the very physical to the data and technology components. So there's actually, imagine a huge infographic about different companies involved in the supply chain. And then what we're looking at is beyond those sort of haptic components, the technologies that are leveraged throughout the supply chain, including robotic process automation, GPS and tagging, blockchain, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so on. So I'm just going to keep running along. I know that we're all here to learn about this stuff. How's it going?
Good. This is why we need presentations before the morning of.
I sent it to you earlier. I was not one of those people. So for tools, architecture, and operations, we're just going to start with the level of the tools. So when you look at a system, the tools, architecture, and operations, the tool is how a human interacts with the technology. It's also called the application layer. And there's a lot of obligations that a lot of companies have that you may not realize that you have in the applications layer, which could lead to a lot of different liabilities. So let me give you an example. Just like a restaurant needs a ramp for people to be able to access the restaurant pursuant to the Americans with Disabilities Act, there's also ADA requirements for websites, where if you don't comply, you could be fined some pretty significant amounts. The thing about these requirements, how it could apply, for example, are if you have a photo, you need to have an alternative tag. So when someone blind comes to your website, it says alt equals in the back end, and in quotation marks, it'll describe the photo if it's something that's required to be described. If you don't comply with this, you could suffer major fines like Target did. They got a $9 million fine, sorry, $6 million fine, $3 million in attorney's fees when they were sued by the American Federation for the Blind. That's obviously a big case. There are a lot of very small cases which are very, very funny when they come up because they're called accessibility trolls. These are individuals that will go to your website, find out what's wrong, scan your website for ADA noncompliance, and they have someone who is who's covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act who can file a lawsuit against you. Many of these settle out of court for a significant amount of money. So that's one way to show that at the application layer, this is all publicly available information. This is something someone can see from the outside and sue you for, which you have to be careful with. So starting with the application layer of tools, of technology and data, you have to make sure that whatever you're showing the outside world is robust and defensible. All right, great.
You're going to have to click here because the clicker's not.
Oh, clicker's not working? All right. So, great. All right, how you guys doing? I'm a lawyer, so the graphics aren't even that sexy, so I apologize. But okay, here we go. So here's the map about supply chain logistics, the tech market map. And we already talked about the different industries. So our law firm has clients in finance, health, advertising, cannabis, and a few other jurisdictions. Obviously, for many of these industries, the supply chain is important for some varying reasons. So for instance, we've got finance, you've got to deal with the flow of money, the flow of data. For health, it's the flow of electronic protected health information. For cannabis, there's a lot of companies that are trying to manage seed to sale or seed to bank tracking to be able to comply with local laws. And then let's go over here. This is the graph that I told you. It's very rough, but it will cover basically what we're talking about, the tools, architecture, and operations, and then how companies use it to meet compliance obligations, to be able to implement digital transformation, to be able to pursue innovation. And we'll discuss innovation as well as being the process of context, conversation, and collaboration. All right, so the T.A.O of Supply Chain. We were touching upon this. Here we are. Accessibility is an issue. You can be fined quite a bit of money. We already covered that. And now that we're back on track, we can talk about things like encryption. People might think, I'm using just a general encryption or American encryption standard, AES, for whatever I'm building in terms of technology or whatever I'm using. The problem is encryption standards were considered a munition until 1974 in the United States, and it's still considered an act of espionage in some other countries if you import encryption without permission from their intelligence or defense agencies. In the US, if you export encryption, you can be fined quite a bit of money. In other countries, you can be put in jail. So this is something that people don't usually consider until it's a little too late. And in terms of that, I'll talk about some fines in some cases in a little bit. But one of them is when your website uses SSL encryption, for example, there are vulnerabilities. So Heartbleed was a vulnerability in SSL encryption, I think in 2016. And the regulators said, hey, if you have this vulnerability on your website and you don't fix it in time, we're going to fine you. So one company got fined $130,000 for not fixing it within 3 months. So this is something you have to acknowledge with technology. This is all from the outside. And given the timing, we'll just kind of race through the next components. You have to make sure that you have a terms of use and cookies disclosure. So there was a company in France fined $25,000 for not having that properly in place. And the Bavarian Data Protection Authority did a sweep of 40 different companies, large companies in their jurisdiction, and found that they were all non-compliant with these requirements. Just to contextualize what law that governs, how many of you have heard of the General Data Protection Regulation? Fantastic. So you know the fine is, if you get it wrong, up to $20 million or 4% of your global net revenue for the prior year. So those two examples were a derivative of GDPR. And then there's other data that you're capturing from the outset that people can tell you're capturing. So again, this is the application layer, the interface. You have to make sure it's compliant. What information you're getting from them, you have to have proper disclosures, terms of use, cookies, and then all the data you're getting from traffic. Then there's the data requisition. You need to have the privacy policy and the consent process in place. Otherwise, you're GDPR not compliant, definitely. The last is communications. So this is when they're sending you information, when they're logging into your website, things like that. On June 13th, 2019, a French company was fined. It was a real estate company, $400,000 for not having adequate authentication. There are U.S. laws for if you don't comply with CAN spam, the Federal Trade Commission will fine you $16,000 per email. For the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, if you send someone a text message and they opted out of receiving text message notifications, that is, I think, $500 per text message that you send. And given that banks, for example, send on average 9 to 10 million text messages a day, when HSBC settled for $39 million, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, a TCPA case, that was a pretty good deal for them. And then for UDAP, that stands for Unfair Deceptive Acts and Abusive Practices. And Wells Fargo, I think, was fined $1 billion for not complying with that. This is all just stuff that's publicly available. If I go to your websites, if I want to find out what you're doing, I can find out all this information and find someone who's impacted and sue you. Now, this is just the application layer. This was a lot. I'm sorry. Again, hopefully the coffee kicked in. It's going to get a lot better now. Because I'm about to throw the open systems interconnection model about how everything communicates throughout a network, the supply chain of data, from the application layer down to the physical layer. And we're not going to go through every step of the way because this is a bit of a nightmare to attack so early in the morning. But I'm just going to give you some of the highlights. All right? Because these are things that any data you have in a manifest, any shipping data, any customer data, any private data will go through this entire architecture. And if you see physical at the very bottom, data is going all the way through the wires and servers and things like that. That's, countries have onshoring, offshoring regulations. There are conflicts in laws. One good example is just find 2 companies that have data onshoring requirements and then go from one to the other. So if you are in the UK, there's a requirement to onshore customer information. But if that UK company has a presence in the United States, the Patriot Act says the US has a right to access that information for national security interests. So that's a bit of a conflict. So in going through the architecture here, we talked about the application layer. And then it translates into the networking language over the presentation layer. And then the session layers for authentication and reconnection, and then the transport layer. That's actually where you get the speed and the destination of where the data is going. And then for the network layer, the network layer, the data layer, we basically it would take a lot longer to discuss this entire process, and our time got cut a little short. So I'm going to go through to the next slide, but suffice it to say, if you guys really want to digest this, feel free. There are laws that apply to every single component of this layer. We talked about on the layer 6, encryption and the cross-border encryption issues, layer 7, the application issues, and then we can go further. But I think that right now, let's go to the operations section. Remember, we talked about tools, architecture, and operations. Tools are the applications. Architecture was that 7-layer map, which probably scared some of you, so that's why I wanted to move past it. And then operations are the people's policies and procedures. Every company has to have people, certain staffing requirements and enough staff to deal with incident responses, notifications, or data protection officers under GDPR rather. Those are the people. The policies are the internal policies, how you're governing privacy internally, how you're governing employees, as well as the outward-facing policies, like your privacy policy and your website. And then I put here policy packages and third party. A lot of companies are doing something now which is very helpful cross-border, which is if I'm going to sell you a product and it's going to change how your internal governance works, I'll give you a packet saying this is how it's going to change your incident response policy, your business resiliency policy, your document retention policy, just so you know. They're doing the work for you. And then there are a lot of organizations that will, when you sign up with them, give you requirements from their policies, these flow-down requirements, saying, we know that you have 36 hours, you have to notify a regulator if there's an incident. Well, notify us within 12. And then that you have to incorporate into your own policies. And the last are the procedures for incident response, disaster recovery, and then internal HR procedures, which are things like internal HR incident notification that are required. So that's tools, architecture, and operations. We got through the most painful part of the discussion. So now let's talk about models, costs, and penalties here. Now these are models in which tools, architecture, and operations are changing in all industries. So it's going to be affecting all you guys. The first is unbundling and reconsolidation. One of the best models is finance, where a lot of the big banks, the brick and mortar, they have within their building their legal risk compliance operations. They have their operations for AML KYC. They have their operations for other functions. But it's getting to the point where you don't need to have all that. And there's the open challenger, neobank, whatever you want to call it, the new banking models, which are creating an application that can do banking. And you basically take all those support functions and you integrate them via application program interfaces, APIs. And that covers most of the work for you. You can have an AML KYC API that lowers your cost significantly and have enough staff to cover that application internally. So what does this yield? This yields a lot of third-party risk when you're dealing with those APIs. You have to make sure that you're mitigating third-party risk. You have to make sure that you're managing the APIs properly. And it does involve a lot of negotiations for contracts. So if you have a good technology lawyer, you can find out what the risks are in that technology and offload the liability. The other model is the internationalization of risk. So what you see there is not a map of trade traffic routes for shipping. They are the main trunk cables for all of the internet. And so when you're looking at the internationalization of risk, you're looking at the transference of data from one jurisdiction to another where different laws may apply. And so that means that there are different data protection laws that apply with some different risks. So for instance, there's a few jurisdictions where if you don't tell the regulator if you had a cyber attack, then whoever in your company is in charge of cybersecurity is personally liable for $50,000 or up to 5 years in jail. So there's a lot of forum shopping for these companies saying, well, I don't want to have to deal with the data protection or the technology risk management issues in Singapore. I'll do it in a different country. I didn't want to point out any countries with lesser protections. I could get in trouble. But then I mentioned jurisdictional conflicts. So instead of forum shopping, trying to find the most friendly jurisdiction for what you want to do, you also have to deal with the fact that sometimes you get data in one jurisdiction you can't have in another jurisdiction. And then that's where you get companies that are dealing with national security issues, and it gets messy. The last model that is changing for the supply chain of data and for the technology and architecture and operations is data flow management, which is basically how many, well, actually, I'm not even gonna, I don't want to point people out. Let's say you're using a cloud service provider and they're saying, hey, we are HIPAA compliant. And they say, great, if you use us, go on our cloud, we're HIPAA compliant. What companies like to hear is, great, I'm compliant with HIPAA. No. Whatever's on the servers is compliant. It doesn't mean that you're compliant, right? So that's one of the major issues that people don't really realize. And when you're looking at the contracts, you have to figure that out. I think if you use some online retail platforms, which I won't point out as well, they have requirements saying, we are PCI compliant. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to file the quarterly self-assessment questionnaire to make sure that you are fully compliant. So the first thing, so that's one thing. In terms of data flow management, you have to make sure you find out what you're responsible for and making sure that every company you deal with is also managing the risk adequately. The last is disaster recovery as a component of this. Let's say you're using a cloud service provider and you're hosting all your data in a country that requires onshoring. Let's say England, they require onshoring, so you have a server in England and you're storing all your data there. That's great. Where is it being backed up? Because if it's being backed up by that cloud service provider in Germany or in servers in Russia or somewhere else, well, then you've got issues because you don't know where your data is going. You don't know where it's being backed up. And a lot of people don't know to ask those questions to make sure they know even where the backups of the data are going. So data's flying everywhere, and regulators are figuring out more and more that they need to get on the ball, and there's a lot of people who are trolls out there who are trying to find out where they can sue one person or the other to get some money. So there's increasing risk, there's increasing scrutiny in this sector. So it's better to get it fixed from the outset. And so basically, if you want to get fully compliant, here's an example for a fintech company. You would have to have your legal risk, compliance, tech ops, all these different groups whenever a new technology regulation passes or data regulation to be able to talk to each other and then find out how to change your application. And then if you want any of these assessments, this was just general Googling, how much would it cost for this, that, or the other assessment? Not necessarily very cheap. So you're spending basically $500,000 to get compliant, and only from that point can you actually try and have a rebuttable presumption of compliance to be able to do business without people coming after you. Even then, there are many things companies overlook that are very risky, which will have increased scrutiny. The cost of noncompliance, I'll tell you. So we have a lot of financial clients I deal with. And so that's the operational expenses in billions, and then how much they end up getting fined. It's a lot of money. This is just banks. There's companies, retail, companies in advertising, tons of companies being fined for data privacy, data security issues. And you just open up any newspaper every day, you'll see them. So now how do we, actually one thing I wanted to note here is one of the beautiful things about this industry that I see where it's going, and please take note, is compliance is a really good defense. Hey, we have our attestation of compliance with this. We've got dotted I's across the T's here. Well, it's actually been the weaponization of compliance, which is, hey, I'm fully compliant, but my competitor is not, and I know this because either I went to their website or I heard that they're doing it this way, or they had a problem we had. We were the first to solve it. We doubt they've gotten there. Which means you can basically go to a regulator and say, hey, you should take a look at that company because we think they're not complying properly. And then that would trigger some pretty significant fines. I believe that's what happened once with, there's a company that, I don't want to call out companies, but there was a company that, a big blockchain company that about 6 years ago was a big bank tattled on them, and they were fined $750,000 when they were still relatively young. Now they're a very large company, but they'd be a lot larger had it not been for the big bank pointing the finger and saying to FinCEN, hey, fine them $750,000, they're not compliant. So applying it to different technologies. Let me actually just check in how much time, like how many, 10 minutes? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? All right, because this is actually a really good kind of educational component. Let's go through the exercise of tools, architecture, and operations. And the first example is robotic process automation and artificial intelligence. Now, people use AI and machine learning interchangeably. They're not the same thing. Neither is RPA. RPA is, if A, then B, very simple process automation. Machine learning, you can actually sort of teach a system how you're making decisions. Supervised machine learning, it also can use pattern recognition and decision trees to come to different decisions. And then artificial intelligence is blank below because I can't explain all the components of artificial intelligence underneath a picture. Suffice it to say, if you look at this, the tools, the platforms that individuals are interfacing with are not the key component here. It's the architecture, not necessarily the operations at this point, but it's the architecture. Let's say I'm using a black box ontology system. So when IBM Watson first came out, they said, hey, any information you put into our system, our AI will process it and spit out the answer. For any of you who've read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you know the big problem here is it doesn't show its work. In that book, they asked a computer that could answer any question, what's the meaning of life, the universe, and everything? And it calculates for 10,000 years, and it comes out with the number 42. And that is one of the things that you get to realize when you're taking the tools, architecture, and operations model and the data flow throughout. The data flow hits a stoppage when it got to an artificial intelligence that couldn't be audited. Now let's go through blockchain. I presume many of you are very familiar with blockchain, so this is a very rapid run-through of how blockchain works, and primarily for the financial models. Blockchain is also being leveraged for smart contracts and multiple other industries. So financially, if you look at the graph, A wants to send money to B. The transaction is represented online as a block. It's transmitted to an entire network. And then on number 4, you can see the network approves the transaction as valid. And then it's added to a chain, and then B gets the money. Now, there are a lot of issues that you can think about. Again, tools, architecture, and operations, data flow. One of the things that's really quirky is the mechanism where all the computers say, hey, that's valid. Because initially, there were blockchain systems being created saying as long as 51% of the computers say it's valid, then that's great, which is why, Bitcoin is like, yeah, it's very spread out, it's decentralized, no one's going to really take it over. Except I believe the government of China owns something like 70% of the systems that are processing Bitcoin, which mildly undermines the integrity if it was just 51% consensus mechanism. But there are other mechanisms in place, and there are additional processes. But these are things that, when you look through the tools, architecture, and operations, and data flowing through the system, help you understand where the vulnerabilities are and how to offload the liability. So, and this is just for anyone who's considering using blockchain. It's immutable, transparent, and traceable. It streamlines the processes for data sharing, faster transactions, and lower costs. And I put the use cases, so supply chain tracking goods and parts for finance, accelerated settlement disputes, and minimizes reconciliations through three-way matching, billing, and cross-border payments. It's being used for identity management, digital currencies, records and contracts management, audit and compliance. You can just see it all there. And personally, from the legal field, you'll see a proliferation over the next few years of smart contracts being developed by some firms working in partnership with some of the larger legal technology providers. And that's really exciting. It may put a lot of people in my industry out of business, but I think I'll be safe. So that was just blockchain. API, this is very simple explanation of our application program interfaces, where a computer says, hey, I want data, I want that data, and then the system will give you the data. We touched upon this when we talked about how banks are decentralizing their operations and then rebundling them into neobanks and challenger banks and things like that. And there's actually a law, PSD2, in the EU, which is requiring certain APIs to be open. So it leads to leaner operations, more efficient operations. And here's a pretty cool graph that shows from the Wells Fargo homepage all the different companies that can be integrated by an API to take over some of the functions. So what's being done at a bank, for example, from the financial perspective, is less and less centralized in the bank. The thing is, when you're dealing with API structures, and we talked about this as well, you have to worry about the third-party contracts. You want to offload the liability. You have to worry about your flow-down responsibilities, and it's mapping out those legal responsibilities, which is a little intensive, but probably going to be automated eventually with smart contracts. So let's now head to the last part, which is the T.A.O in context, which is going to be another 5 minutes. All right. So basically, this is the second to last slide. When to apply the T.A.O, I mentioned it's compliance, digital transformation, and innovation. Compliance This model helps you understand and map out business impact assessments, privacy flows, privacy impact assessments. It helps you identify what the third parties are doing with your data or what you can have other parties do with you can have them do with your data or what you can do with their data. Third-party risk and outsourcing we touched upon. Now, one of the major issues of compliance is keeping up with regulatory change, not only in the home jurisdiction, but cross-border. And then making sure that your policies, procedures, control, and training are up to date in every place where you're operational. So compliance, checking the boxes. And then digital transformation is whenever you want to incorporate a new business model, a new technology, and basically it's identifying the strategy, what's the mission, what's the scope, and then identifying the workflows, the customer, and other impacts, and then actually mapping out for execution and implementing digital transformation. And the last, which is my favorite, which we do a lot of work in the New York City CyberLaw Group, but we do a lot for innovation. When we have clients with new technologies, we do context, conversation, collaboration. So we take a new technology, and we will map it against the context of existing regulations. So for example, one of the laws that got first applied to Bitcoin was a 1948 law, from which was derived the Howey test. Now, US has common law, so you find the law that applies. That was the case that applies. That's the case that applied. For a lot of additional technologies, we map it against the existing legal context to make sure you're not breaking any existing laws. Then conversation, which means educating a lot of the regulators in different jurisdictions via different mechanisms. So for example, we help set up regulatory sandboxes in various jurisdictions. We provide white papers to regulators on behalf of our clients. And then so that's educating the regulators, and in some cases actually help clients engage in cooperative research and development agreements with defense groups or intelligence groups when they're dealing with highly sensitive data. And then, so that's conversation. The last is collaboration. Oftentimes, regulators are overwhelmed. Regulators are trying to keep up, and case law is even further behind that. And you need to get clear standards by that, before then. So you can take the lead of what the payment card industry did. The regulators were a little slow on passing credit card laws, so they drafted the PCI data security standard, and they said, hey, we're going to make sure all credit cards abide by this. And all the regulators in all the states said, actually, we agree with that. We're just going to incorporate that standard into our regulation and require it. So for collaboration, we find companies with similar types of technology that hasn't been addressed by regulation yet, and we help them draft standards, and those standards also inform what the regulator is doing. So if you're going to be innovative, oftentimes you have to inform the entire process that already exists, from the cases, regulators, down to other people in your sector. Which is why groups like this are great, because you guys get to share a lot of information in terms of supply chain and find out how to draft standards amongst yourselves to really inform the regulators and move things forward. So I think I did have some suggestion of questions to ask of a technology itself when you get approached by a new technology. What do regulators think? What's market adoption? What are company competitors? And then of the company selling you the technology, does it exist? Are you being sold vaporware? Do I need it? Does it do what it says? Is it secure? And so on. And then the last is internally, how much is this going to cost me in terms of legal risk and compliance? And will we actually be able to leverage or apply the technology? A lot of people are creating technology for problems that don't exist. So these are all questions that you'll be asking yourself when you actually listen to other companies try and sell you products, or when you try and sell products, things to keep in account, making sure that you can educate people on the tools, architecture, and operations of the technology and the data flow and supply chain throughout all of that, not only in your home systems, but with foreign systems and in home and target jurisdictions. That was a lot. Yeah, Q&A. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hey. Got a question?
You mentioned something really interesting about offloading liability.
Yes.
So can you please elaborate on that? If we have buyers and vendors here, so are you offloading it to your counterpart, or?
Yeah, you're offloading it to the counterpart, or you're otherwise mitigating the liability. Here's a good example. Apple Pay. back when Apple Pay first started, there was an issue. You're supposed to have two-factor authentication under certain regulations, which means you're telling a computer you are who you are via, what is it? Something you know, are, or have. You know a password, you are your biometrics, or you have a token. So when you log into Apple Pay using your fingerprint, the phone stores 10 different fingerprints. So if a boyfriend and girlfriend are sharing access to their iPad and they can both get into the bank account, and then they break up and your ex has access to your bank account, that's a major issue. So in the terms and conditions, Apple had something saying if you use biometrics and you're the victim of fraud, we're not responsible. And so the banks had to understand the technology that Apple had and be able to say to Apple, hey, we noticed this part, but that means that puts the liability on us. Why don't you put Apple's not responsible and neither is, and whatever the name of the bank using the application is. So it's first being aware of the liability and then working with your counterpart to find out if you can both offload the liability under regulations. And if you can offload the liability and it's very clear, that becomes a component of the negotiation. So, there are a lot of vendors that'll be turned down because a large organization will say, hey, we want to bring you on board, but you're not going to protect our data adequately or do this or that or the other business process adequate enough for compliance. We're not going to deal with you. Sorry.
Piggybacking on the offloading the liability, there's a growth in cyber risk insurance. What are your thoughts on that? Do you work with the insurers or the companies? Your contracts?
Oh, I'm sorry. The question is, there's a growth in cyber risk insurance, and do I work with the companies? Do I work with the insurance companies? So a lot of the insurance industry is accelerating by leaps and bounds how they're defining cyber risk insurance. So we actually deal with one of the largest reinsurance companies on the globe, as well as some a lot smaller local insurance companies. And the thing is, the great thing about cybersecurity and technology is from the outset, you can map out technology, architecture, operations, and data flows and clearly identify the risks. And if you're mitigating those risks properly, we have a proper incident response plan, we have this, that, or the other in place, we have our SOC 2 attestation, we have our different attestations, that should lower your insurance liability. Again, if you're in a target-rich environment, if you are, holding on to a ton of money, that's very different. Obviously, your insurance rate would go a little higher. There's ways to try and mitigate it, also via processes like using various containers or legal entities and offloading liabilities amongst legal entities. I heard a really great fact the other day that Lehman Brothers actually didn't have to dissolve because all the risk was allocated amongst legal entities, so only those legal entities that had that critical risk could have been wound up and Lehman could have continued. So it's finding out how to allocate risk amongst legal entities, amongst jurisdictions, and then making sure that your technology, architecture, and operations are fully compliant. And I think that's how a lot of insurance companies are looking at this. Last question? Go ahead.
Yeah, so you're utilizing offshore and outsourcing and onboarding protocols for the supply chain, and you're working with the cybersecurity. Are you using all three, or you have to be directed towards four? Particularly important when they give you a lot of typical, having some
So let me see if I got your correction right.
You got offshore, you got outsourcing,
Mhm. Offshoring, outsourcing, and onboarding. All those are all components that are brought into a risk assessment model, and then which factor into compliance documents, attestations, and then legal contract management for risk management.
Yeah, but are they giving you a variance there to, 99.9% deviation, which could allow the SSL protocol may allow.
Oh, you're talking about specifically about SSL, secure socket layer encryption?
SSL, right.
It really, so the governance of SSL really depends on the jurisdictional coverage, and sort of a lot of people like to seek forgiveness rather than ask for permission. So I don't know if there's any company out there that is 100% compliant with the entire data management through their tools, architecture, and operations. But if you're approaching specifically SSL, That's a lot lower bar to account for, since SSL patches are usually issued rather broadly. And then if you're talking about cross-border SSL for encryption issues in jurisdictions where there could be cross-border encryption issues, you actually have to deal with regulators. So we map out a process where you go to the local agency, the Department of Commerce, or yeah. And so again, for the innovation component, we go to the regulators and we say, this is how you, this is what our client would like to do. We'd like to get permission to do it. And then oftentimes there are direct or indirect nods that it's allowed. All right.
Thank you so much, Paul. Can everyone hear me on this mic? Yes. All right. Paul will be available for questions. If there's any groupies that are desperate to have their questions answered, please follow him. Paul, head to the back so people can stalk you. And I am going to actually take a minute to ask where everyone is from. So how many people here are from New York? Okay. And who is visiting from out of town? Good amount. We are truly a global event today. We have people pretty much from every country around the world that are attending, which again, this is our minimum viable summit, which is our MVP of getting this event off the ground. So we appreciate everyone's enthusiasm and interest. We are truly a community for our members and by our members. Next up, I am going to introduce our next panel. Our moderator, can we get Emma Cosgrove up here? Emma is a reporter from Supply Chain Dive, and she is pretty fantastic. She's been grilling our three panelists on fashion supply chain. We have Stephanie Benedetto from Queen of Raw, and Andre Galoob from Else, and where's Elisa? Elisa Rossi from Milaner. Let me make sure you all get mics. Go ahead and take seats. I'm going to change up. Actually, Steph, you're going to be up first. Let me get you.
So you're doing 5 minutes?
Yeah.
You need some help? Let me make myself.
That'd be lovely. Queen of Raw. No.
Yep.
Got it. Can you get me my charger? Actually, it's right there. Yeah. Because this is about to die. Ta-da. Fantastic. All right.
This is what life as a startup is like.
Absolutely. If our panels can take a seat and let Stephanie, everyone's going to do, all the panelists are going to do 5 minutes, giving you a quick, brief visual overview of what their company is and does. So everyone in the room has some visual context to anchor to, because we are a very interdisciplinary audience. I don't assume that everyone understands what the evolution of the fashion supply chain looks like, so I will pass it off to Stephanie.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Benedetto, and we are Queen of Raw. This is the problem we're here to address. Right now, in your supply chains, there's a lot of waste. In fact, this waste is occurring from raw materials to finished goods. Right now in the world, every single year in fabrics alone, it's $120 billion worth of unused materials. This stuff just sits in warehouses collecting dust, or it gets burned or sent to landfill. But why? Because of this. This is how a lot of companies from small to large are managing their supply chains. Obviously, it is an Excel spreadsheet. And what happens is it gets riddled with error, costing businesses a fortune. In fact, this is actually how one of the biggest fashion brands in the world who we work with, and will go unnamed, is actually managing their supply chain. And they came to us, and they thought they had a certain amount of waste in their supply chain in liability on the books. Well, since working with us, they actually realized they had more than 10x in liability on the books. So it's a problem for people, it's a problem for planet, but it's also a problem for profit. This is the people and planet problem. That waste is killing our environment. In fact, when it comes to textile production, it's the #2 polluter in the world. One t-shirt takes 700 gallons of water to produce. And if we continue at the current pace of textile production alone, by 2025, 2/3 of the entire world's population will face shortages of fresh water and be exposed to hazardous chemicals from textile production alone. So we're not talking about 50 years from now, we're not talking about 10 years from now, we're talking about today, and it is occurring on our shores. But there's hope. I know about this problem because my family has been in the fashion and textiles business for over 100 years. And we built Queen of Raw to solve it. It's a marketplace for businesses to buy and sell their unused raw materials, like fabrics, keeping that stuff out of landfill, and turning all that pollution into profit. And we don't just stop there. For the sellers, we give you all that valuable, which Lisa was talking about, real-time data and analytics about what's going on in your supply chain and that waste. Our solution helps you identify waste in real time, click a button and sell it in our public or private marketplace, and then over time, it can help you intelligently minimize that waste. And since working with a lot of businesses, just in the fall alone, we've saved them a ton of time and money. We've also saved over 1 billion gallons of water. That money actually equates for some of our enterprise customers to 15% off their bottom line. So this is not just a nice to have, this is a have to have. But why now? Why does this matter now? Well, brands across industries and around the globe are signing commitments to reduce their waste by 2030. And they face exposure to significant liability with all the recent changes in the laws. So we are here to help. There is a solution, and you can start today. So together we can change the world. Thank you.
Next up, Andre, do you have your computer?
Here we go. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrei Golub. I come from Milan, Italy. My company is ELS Corp. ELS means just something else, no? But well, that's at the end what it means. But we started with a meaning. We called it exclusive luxury shopping experience. So thinking of a new shopping experience, but at the end it just became something else. Our idea, our vision was to propose to fashion companies, especially in premium and luxury niche sector, a simple way to try digital transformation. No? Because everybody is talking about it, especially big companies, but concretely what it means, many companies don't understand. What are the scenarios, how to touch it, and well, we say let's do it. Then, after the introduction by the previous speaker, fashion is an awful industry, right? It's beautiful, but it's also quite scaring. I won't speak about the environment impact. I just want to complete the picture by another problem that it gets, and so we call totally broken, is that consumers and retailers and consumers live in two different planets right now. No? In 2019, consumers are not ready anymore to buy anything that brands just push in the market. People don't want just to buy, just to look, listen advertising and buy new things, new collections. consumers want to be more, how to say, more, they are more educated, want to look for things that are suit them well. So we speak about trends like personalization in everywhere, in communication, in product, in emotional link between consumers and brands, and especially the consumers start having new values. The values are about transparency, trust, environmental friendly, and so they will demand from the companies to prove that their DNA is not to do what we've seen before. No, at the same time, it's a puzzle with no solution, because retail, the whole retail industry, as it is defined, as it works now, is basically solving last mile operation. No, everything is already produced. All stocks are filled of stuff, and we only sell it, we outsell it. No? So at the end, as a result, most products that brands sell, they go with a discount. No? So where we are accustomed living in a world when a year in advance brands present their new visions, and then it comes to the market and everything is sold on discount. Nobody's happy with that, but since this is how it works, that's the situation. And my company said, let's try something else. Let's try to virtualize the supply chain, the logic of, and try to invert it to connect consumers with retailers, with manufacturers. So we created cloud technology, and to make it short, we won't go into technical details, but well, our unique proposition is to be digital platform for digital transformation, which basically connects the phase of product design, digital product development, the visualization, advanced visualization in 3D, bring it to retail to enable new scenarios like personalization, like, advanced visualization and omni-channel, so how to see a product in 3D in an environment, in augmented reality, virtual reality, in a physical world, digital environment, how to connect the advanced tools like scanners, fit scanners, body scanners, the algorithms of fittings, and at the end, how all this in real time can be connected into manufacturing. The future scenarios, very interesting scenarios, for example, local for local, so not anymore containers, not shipping, but make as closely as where there is a consumer. Now, the factories of the future we're involved in, they will look like half of this space. No, it could be the whole factory able to produce products for the consumers that live locally, not anymore a shipment. That's it. If I can run the video from here, Lisa. No? No, I don't know where it is. Because it's just a very quick spot. No, so from the recent update. Whatever. Okay, that's the thing. I wanted to show how the robots are produced. It is a PDF. That's great. That's the video. The black piece. Well, that's it. Now we try to reinvent, make things easy, digitally interconnected, and the black the black box is how it should be. Thank you. Next. We'll answer into.
We'll see Andre's video tomorrow. Next up, we have Elisa Rossi from Milaner, and I will pass everything over to you. This thing?
I think we need to power that adapter. Brian had earlier.
Brian, please report to the front.
Remember how there was an adapter though? Hello. Perfect. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Elisa Rossi. I'm the co-founder of Milaner. So in the spirit of sharing inspiring immigration stories, I just wanted to start with our immigration story. So that's myself with Serena Spinucci, who's my co-founder. We're from central Italy, a town called Porto Sant'Elpidio. It's literally one of the main hubs of luxury shoe manufacturing in Europe. So all of the biggest luxury brands come and manufacture their shoes where we were born. And what you see here is a few pictures of an artisan. His name is Michele Petecchia. And this is the process. You really see it here. They tan their own leather, so we could walk into the artisan workshop and we could customize our boots, pick the leather. It's all vegetable tanned and beautiful colors. We could pick the details and the dimensions and really make a pair of boots that was perfect for us. And we immigrated to California and Switzerland, respectively. I moved to California, worked in the tech industry for a long time. But we could never replicate the same luxury experiences that we were so lucky to have growing up in Italy. And there's something about the unique insight of immigrants, right? Connecting the dots between the world they come from and the new world they found. And what we found and what we were exposed to were luxury consumer trends in our new countries. So I was exposed to them here in the United States as a consumer myself, everything that Stephanie and Andrea have talked so far. So luxury consumer trends calling for transparency, sustainability, experiences, customization. I learned moving abroad how Made in Italy was a huge brand outside of Italy. And how luxury consumers started demanding transparency and sustainability. And now that's more and more important. And to us, that all sounded awfully familiar. We're like, wait, this is exactly the experiences we had when we were growing up. So if you're familiar with the Italian manufacturing, in general, European luxury manufacturing industry is an extremely fascinating industry. It's been around, the Italian manufacturing industry in luxury has been around for 500 years. And today we have 225K luxury goods manufacturers. Some of them are represented here in the slide. They've been around for 50 to 7 years. They make the best luxury goods in the world. And they are the unsung heroes behind all of the luxury brands. So there are people making handbags for Chanel, Louis Vuitton, Dior, you name it, shoes, silk scarves, hats. And the personal luxury goods market is a massive market. We're talking about $290 billion generated in 2018, expected to grow to $390 billion by 2025. And what we were seeing, what Serena and I were seeing 15 years after leaving Italy, is the massive macroeconomic opportunity that exists there. Offshoring practices by the top luxury brands have unlocked excess capacity. Unemployment, but that also means that they have unlocked openness to doing things differently. There has been an evolution of the role of the artisan. So the manufacturing jobs aren't perceived as being as glamorous as they used to be. But that's changing very quickly, and you'll see it in a little bit. And in order to cope with this change in macroeconomics, artisans had to acquire new skills that sometimes were definitely not part of their core competencies. And so we saw a massive opportunity to bridge the gap between what was happening in the luxury manufacturing industry in Europe and what the market demanded. And so we started Milaner. Milaner is a platform that is enabling Europe's top luxury manufacturers to sell direct to consumers and engage in celebrity collaborations for the first time. We have a couple of business models that are up and running at the moment. One is a direct-to-consumer marketplace, the branded Milaner. All of the goods are sold and custom-made straight from the source, from our manufacturing partners. And the second business model that we're about to launch is influencers and celebrities collaborations. So it's any influencer who wants to launch their own product line can do it using the most sustainable supply chain there is, which is luxury manufacturing in Europe. And so very quickly around how we do this. This is the anatomy of Milaner. It's all about luxury on a first-name basis. So we actually completely pull the curtain on the supply chain, and we tell you the names of the artisans working on any given product, their stories, their faces, their voices. We have videos of them and their beautiful locations where they work. Milaner takes care of quality control, customer service, brand consistency. So to our customer, we look like a luxury brand. There's no inventory, or it's very extremely nimble. So we're able to make almost everything made to order, and obviously in certain cases we're able to up production and store some inventory, but it's always done in a very, very carefully planned way. Customization is possible because everything is made to order, everything can be customized. We obviously use technology, that's my industry that I come from, AI for personalization of the experience, but also for product planning and process automation in the back end, most precisely for everything that's the back office of the artisan atelier. And this all process leads to a fair distribution of profits between the manufacturers and Milaner, and ultimately leads to lower prices for the end consumer. Our artisan network at the moment is made up of 50 amazing luxury goods manufacturers, and we have new ones being screened every week across 12 product categories, 3 countries, 3 European countries, and over 3,000 SKUs that are really the best sellers of our artisans. We always ask them, what do you love to make? And these are the products that we have in our archives at the moment. And before I leave you, I just want to show you a quick video of hopefully works of our manufacturers. And these are the very first manufacturers that we started working with, and a little bit of their stories and a little bit of the places where they come from.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Yep. Okay, would anyone like to cross the room to sit over here? There are so many spots. I'll give you 30 seconds. You can cross in the front.
You don't have to
Whatever you
stand
want.
by the wall.
Come on. Okay, I'm going to do Q&A for about 25 minutes, and we're going to throw it to questions, and then I get to ask a few questions because I have the mic, a few more. I'm Emma Cosgrove. I'm a reporter for Supply Chain Dive, where we cover fashion supply chains and all kinds of other supply chains, from freight, logistics, operations, and procurement. If you were driving on this whole day, you would really enjoy reading Supply Chain Dive because of the variety, and I hope you will subscribe. Done. This panel is really, really exciting. When Lisa and I first started talking about it, I was like, guys, I get it. Like, we need to go from 26 weeks to 14 weeks in fashion supply chains. We need technology to do that. Andre, that's not what we're talking about, is it? Talk to me about what kind of speed we're talking about. You get another.
Well, the speed is real time. From my point of view, the digital transformation makes sense only if we consider scenarios of a real time. Means that product design phase shall happen in the same moment as retailing, as manufacturing. It has to be interconnected, and to give an opportunity to designers to follow the market in real time, and manufacturing to be adjusted. Now then, easy to say, well, not so easy to implement, but in any case, we have no choice. No, until yesterday, until today, let's say, we live in the era of Amazon, when everything will be delivered next hour. No, so people don't care if the things are already made and stocked. No, or here we speak about sustainable supply chain. We speak about new models made to order and so on, but still people would like to get it right now. No, so it's a great challenge, and technology has an answer. So we will very soon, I'm sure, see the new scenarios when made to order will close by speed to made to stock and delivery.
Real time. Does anyone in the room work with the supply chain that has a concept of real time at all? Yeah. One person? Okay, let's talk later because I want to hear about that. I couldn't even wrap my mind around how much that would change a retail supply chain. So can you just walk me through, we're not going to talk a lot about the customer today. Actually, we have a lot of back-end things to talk about, but can you just talk about the customer experience of what you imagine really quickly? So what's the timeline? I walk into a store that your technology is in. Is that what you're saying? And I get a shoe that I designed?
Yeah. Well, what happens in store, I think we already haven't seen all the technologies that exist in store. Now, the visualization, possibility to customize products, possibility to cross physical products, so by touching a sample with seeing it on a screen and from a digital catalog, these things are seen. But what referring back to my concept of real time is that the inventory of what we can sell shall be real time. So if something is not available anymore, or just yesterday in the evening the designer decided to put a new option, a new color, a new accessory, it has to be propagated in all point of sales. Now this is for me critical, not exactly how the consumer will touch things or interact. This is, well, it's important, but it's easy, let me say. Now, what is not easy is to interconnect the inventory in real time to consumers. And in this case, we also use, that is our approach and our technology allows, use the consumer, the retail channel as a test of the interest of the market. It's not only I buy it or I don't buy it. Now, any action that consumer does on digital, physical screens in a physical environment gets immediately back to brands, to the supply chain, and maybe tomorrow, next move, so we talk about artificial intelligence not to optimize the customer experience. Next move of the consumer, it's already optimized, and also the inventory, it's already optimized at the same time. This is what we're talking.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, a lot of people, and you just touched on, think that the speed to market and on demand means that you have to get into kind of the fast fashion category in order to compete, and that inherently is very damaging. But there are new business models and new opportunities that allow you to speed up in certain ways, but also improve your efficiencies, and that also has a positive, sustainable impact. We've been encouraging people not just to sell their waste, but to think about reusing some of their own waste or buying other people's waste. Why? Because we're in such an interesting time with the shifting political, social, economic landscape, and Lisa mentioned a bit about it, Trump, China, Brexit, imports, exports, China, trade wars. I mean, you name it, it's crazy. But knowing where your inventory sits in real time, what you have in waste from raw materials to finished goods, and how to optimize and use it is how you solve for those challenges today, and then how you scale up again in the future.
Yeah, I mean, everything I read about speeding up fashion supply chains, it's a lot about the back office, the decisions. People are, they cut days out of their lead times by becoming more agile in the home office. And it's because the manufacturing timelines are fixed. There's nothing you can do about that. So Elisa, could you come in with luxury on this one and tell us how speed has a role in luxury supply chains?
Yeah, so I may take another position on this, but
like delivery, not necessarily production.
When it comes to luxury, talking about speed, it's almost like, right, kind of cheapening the concept. Because luxury and the definition of luxury is slowness, is history, heritage, is taking decades to perfect a skill, to perfect a technique. And so this is actually really important to our artisan partners. When we walk with them, they always make sure, whatever you do with, with this relationship, just make sure that that definition of luxury is preserved to the end customer. So that's very important to us. Having said that, a lot of things are made to order, and clearly customers aren't going to wait around a lifetime for them. So there's a number of things that we've done to be able to increase speed, and more than speed, efficiency, right? So there's a number of things. Obviously, AI is one of them. We're able to forecast demand much more precisely. We are able to use technology to improve what you were saying, the back office. So our artisan partners, some of them took hours to save a PDF, and things like that. Those make a huge difference in kind of their day-to-day and kind of streamlining the processes and the operations. And then ultimately, another thing that we noticed when we started working with our network was the network benefits, right? Which is something the luxury brands never really brought to the table, because when they come with their materials, and they come with their quality inspectors, and they come with their designers, and they just say, do this. We give this to you, you do this, done, no questions asked, this is the price, and just execute on this. And we found in a position where we were in the luxury brands, although we recreated a lot of the skills of a luxury brand inside our company. But we used the network in a smart way. And so there's manufacturer A started collaborating with manufacturer B, and things started happening that weren't happening before, and that led to speed, that led to a smarter way of doing things that wasn't happening before because of the silos that kind of luxury brands have created in luxury manufacturing.
Yeah, I love it that I don't think you're going to have a problem with demand at all, especially with influencer culture. But probably your first stakeholders that you really needed to get on board were the manufacturers themselves. Convincing them that
Absolutely.
this was a good idea at all.
Took us 2 years to get our first partners.
Yeah.
It's the business etiquette in Europe is so different from anything you've ever seen in the United States. And having worked for 15 years in the Silicon Valley, I got there with my PowerPoint presentation, and I was like, this is what we're gonna do. And even though I spoke the language, I didn't speak the culture. I forgot the culture, so I had to relearn Italian culture. And I was like, okay, no, wait, coffee. Let's have lunch. And just really become part of their family, and that was what really got us to then, now we're part of the family.
But it's funny, you kind of just touched on that it took hours to download a PDF in some communities and some cultures, right? And here we are talking about blockchain and machine learning and all these future technologies. But I think part of the beauty of some of these technologies is when they actually aren't based on the technology themselves and can simplify production and simplify processes. So with localization and on demand, maybe that part of the world does not need to be using that technology, but because of your technology, they've formed that community and they do things their way. So I think there are opportunities for technology to obviously improve certain parts of supply chain. They can create challenges in others, and you do need to respect and look at other cultures and how they're going to be using it if you're going to go after worldwide adoption.
Yeah, we're going to get into localization next, but my favorite thing about innovating in supply chains is that a lot of times your most important IP has nothing to do with tech. It's the slog. It's getting to those entrenched partners that are not digitized yet and doing all of that footwork. And when you talk about competitors and big tech companies coming in and crushing startups, I don't see them being very good at the slog that Elisa just described. And especially when you get into parts of Asia, getting into those manufacturing communities on the ground is IP, in my opinion. I think it's a huge deal. I'm wondering if we could go down the line and just talk about the inherent benefits of localizing supply chains, because I feel like it's not an inevitable possibility. It makes a lot of sense when you get into it, but it doesn't really seem feasible in the globalized world that we have. Andre, you want to start with that? What's the benefit of a localized supply chain?
In our vision, we are a technology company. We try to implement the scenarios of when it's relatively not important where to produce, or locally, or in a foreign country. It's enough that the manufacturing is compatible with. Now, when we talk about made to order, single piece, customized, it means that the order, the request for production must be specified in every detail, have all the information. In this case, and especially if we're talking about, development of the manufacturing itself, that living apart, the real luxury, that is handmade and so on, very soon, anyway, most of manufacturing will be automated up to a very important level, and then at least but also in the US, of course. But I know very well what we're talking in Europe. In Europe, they're interested to understand the concept of small factories, green factories, placed exactly around where people live. So it's not anymore a factory somewhere that gets a lot of orders. It doesn't matter, made to order or made to stock, but it's not factory somewhere. It's a small thing that where humans probably will work together with the robots, with automation, 3D printing, additive manufacturing, and the machines, traditional machines. It also doesn't matter. But the matters is the concept that the manufacturing comes closer to consumers. Now, this is a super sustainable model, and it needs the new way of managing the manufacturing process. So if there is an order, if I go to a store next corner, configure, so play with all the technology and create a new product, new shoe for me, how do I want it? It could be a 3D printed right there, probably, very soon. But let's say middle term scenario is when some pieces are 3D printed, some other it's still leather, cut, stitched, and then assembled or by humans or by robots, but in a very precise way. So it's her order, it's exactly that order. Now components are different because it's made to measure, it's all customized, now, and this requires some particular attention. Now in our case, our platform is able to generate that kind of order, and then we have experience in the video, the black box. Tomorrow I will go deeply into black box, where we called hybrid manufacturing process. Hybrid is when some operations can still be traditional, cutting, stitching, gluing, whatever, by humans, by whoever. All the rest is automated. No, you can make, for example, an outsole in 3D printed because it's made to measure, and then the final product could be assembled by robots. There is nothing bad, but the most critical elements are elaborated by the experts with the soul, with how they can do it. This is, from my point of view, the most interesting, is not to go from 0 to 1, from old style to totally new additive manufacturing, but think of the next 5-10 years in transition. Now, we call it hybrid process.
And we're already seeing this, even our artisan partners are using this model. So they know what parts of the process need to be hand-shaped and what parts of the process are okay with automation. And ultimately, you get to an incredible luxury goods.
Yeah, and Lisa, talk about the cost dynamics on your model as well, because we're talking about how most of fashion supply chains are not like Milaners, but the cost dynamics change in your scenario, and the products become more accessible as well. Can you talk about that?
Well, absolutely. Well, that's because we're not charging the same markups as a luxury brand, right? So the cost of the products are the same. It's just what happens afterwards, which we keep it very honest. And we do that because, we just want that exposure. We want that connection to be made by as many people as possible. Because only if that happens, then we can really see a change in the ecosystem, And so it's a matter of scale, like enabling scale, but democratizing this experience, this luxury experience, without compromising, the definition of luxury.
It also gets closer to the true value of the things that we buy, which
Absolutely.
is so interesting as a concept
And
of supply chain.
One of the consumer luxury trends that I was mentioning earlier is about how consumers today, even like the very, very high-end luxury consumers, are perceiving a price-value misalignment. Everyone is. Even people are spending like $5,000 for a handbag are like, I think there's something, smelly here. And people are becoming sophisticated shoppers, right? So people can do their homework. They can, they travel. They see things. Ultimately, that's that intelligence, that's leading to better decisions when it comes to shopping.
And sometimes people hear the word localization or sustainable, that S word, whatever it means to everybody, and you automatically assume that it's going to cost you more. Well, the fact is, with these new innovative localization and on-demand and access to dead stock, you can get what you need when you need it at a discount located near where you're manufacturing and avoid all of these issues in the current political, social, economic world. So it actually improves your bottom line and improves your top line with the story you're able to share with your consumers. So it can actually make economic sense as well as sense for people and planet. And I always think back when I think about localization to the way my great-grandfather did business in 1896. I mean, he came over on a ship from Austria. He landed at Ellis Island and he settled into the Lower East Side, the original garment district. And as an immigrant, he was chasing the American dream and had to figure out how to make a living. So what do? You find materials and supplies nearby, things people had brought on the ship with them that they weren't using. You create things by hand with minimal waste and minimal toxins because your bottom dollar depends on it, and you sell to local customers. And it was incredibly successful, profitable business. He didn't talk about it as sustainable or circular economy, of course, but at the end of the day, that's what it was, and it made economic sense.
I want to stick on sustainability. I want to hear how localization can contribute to sustainability, and then I want to hear, is your ultimate goal to put yourself out of business with Queen of Raw?
Yeah.
Because that's what it sounds like.
No, 100%. I mean, my dream is absolutely to answer the latter first, that we never need this marketplace anymore, right? Because everybody has optimized their supply chains to the point that they aren't creating any waste. But then that just means that everyone will be on our software solution, which is great, and we will have solved the world's water crisis. So I got no problem with that in the future. But to your first point, when it comes to localization, obviously, the world doesn't operate the way my great-grandfather did business. Now in supply chains, there are hundreds of steps across the globe. Metric tons of water, chemicals, crops, oil are obviously used in the process. So with localization, you're really able to start to get real-time, on-demand information in a local community, get access to everything you need from farm to finished good through to end of life, and you're able to avoid a lot of the issues and challenges that a lot of current supply chains are facing. I mean, we know that major businesses last year had to burn billions upon billions of dollars worth of unsold materials, from raw materials to finished goods. That's eating into their bottom line. And with localization, they can avoid some of that. They can know what's going on in their supply chain in real time, find what they need when they need it, and produce that finished good. And then at end of life, they know what to do, how to recycle it and put it back in their chain.
That's one of my favorite things to look for in supply chains, because waste is not the result of carelessness or people not caring. If you can make money off your waste, a business is going to make money off their waste. I mean, you make thousands of dollars a day in Manhattan in a grocery store on cardboard alone. So why is there no good supply chain for fashion waste?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I asked myself the same time, so many complex problems actually have really simple solutions. And I laughed at myself when we first thought of this idea and we're looking at this issue, like, why has nobody built this marketplace before? And, I think the one thing that it comes to is it's not about the technology and it's not about the cost. It's just about a little bit of a shift of a mindset, right? To some of these sellers on our platform, major enterprise corporations, they had no problem selling on our marketplace publicly or privately. But now a lot of them, because they've been working with us over time, have turned around and become buyers. And they realize the economic benefit. And that is a shift in a mindset that we're starting to see. And it's growing more and more every day. They're seeing the economic benefit of also buying this waste. And now that we're putting them on all this community into one place in the digital sphere that they never were before, that's when the magic happens.
Gotcha.
And actually, just to add to the mindset change that you're talking about, I think it applies to consumers as well, right? Because it's all about, consumer education obviously plays a huge part in this, because what we're trying to do really actively actually is to educate and set the right expectations around what consumers can expect from us, right? And that's important. And as more and more consumers are gonna be okay with waiting 2 weeks for a handbag that's meticulously handcrafted by an artisan in Sicily, right? And as more and more people see that as luxury, right? As opposed to, kind of speed and having something the next day in a very kind of wasteful way, then I think that real change is gonna start to happen. And it's mindset.
Yeah, it's very, I want to talk about digital infrastructure for a second. For each of you have 3 very different sets of stakeholders that you actually need to work with. So I feel like when a solution fixes an existing problem in a supply chain and contributes to the circular economy, it's very easy to be like, great, we solved it, done. Andre, what do the companies you're looking to partner with or are partnering with now, what do they need in place to work well with you? And do they have it in place?
In our case, all technology is in cloud. No, it's not just in cloud, in Azure cloud. No, so the companies would only need a willing to use cloud. That's it. It's very simple. We are totally API based. We try to not store any data. For us, it's very easy. We try to only automate the operations. perfectly we easily interconnect with existing IT systems. So I mean, from this point of view, if I got your question correctly,
No,
or
you did. It's mind bending. An inventory-free retail system means you don't actually need that much tech on the back end because it all happens in the same moment. Elisa, can you talk about digital infrastructure with your partners?
Yeah, so we essentially have we're in the process of building actually a platform to manage, product archives and order management, order fulfillment, logistics, printing invoices, right? Back to the PDF problem, printing any shipping documentation required to ship items, so that we essentially simplify the life of our manufacturing partners to a point where they can really just focus on making a beautiful product, which is ultimately what we want them to do.
Great. Stephanie's going to go, and then we're going to throw to questions. So get your questions ready.
Yep. So when we started Queen of Raw, we built it kind of as an open marketplace for businesses to buy and sell their waste. But we realized that we had a challenge. A lot of our enterprise customers came to us and wanted to participate, but they had no idea what they had in waste. So that's where we had to build some of the tools that we built. And of course, we can get into the fun of machine learning and blockchain. But at the end of the day, all that matters is that we built simple tools where from an app on their phone in 15 seconds or less, we can help them identify waste, onboard it into our marketplace automatically, and then over time, now that we have all this valuable previously dark data in their supply chain, we can help them minimize waste going forward. So in terms of kind of integration, the community, we're seeing from small to large, when you make it quick and easy and simple for them to be able to use it, obviously not simple for us to build, but for them to use it and understand and see the immediate return they get when they're getting money for their waste right away, that's when we really have a positive benefit.
Okay, and before we go to questions, are you your business model is just a SaaS model, or are you?
No, so our
transactions as well?
marketplace, we get a commission off every sale, and then for the data and analytics, there's a SaaS software.
Gotcha. Okay, who's got a question?
Thank you. Chris Gaspin with Mal Associates. I have a question about transparency. Each of you spoke a bit about transparency. Should I wait for the mic? Okay. Can you hear it better? Yep, okay. So you each talked a bit about transparency, and I challenge how transparent do we actually want our supply chains to be? Just as an example of that, I spoke with a local manufacturer here, and they said, I want to tell you that I've got 3 child laborers in my factory, but my legal team is screaming if I tell you that, then our buyer is going to sue us. So how do we be as transparent as we want to be, to have all this kind of like, hey, we've gotten rid of all the waste. That's material waste is one example. How do we be the kind of transparent that we need to be to solve all the issues, to share all the kind of data to do that?
Okay, so we obviously meet and screen every single manufacturers we work with, right? So actually visit personally, myself, Serena, all of our teams. We see where the manufacturing happens. We get taken through the whole process several times a year. Ultimately for us, it's not about what if I pull the curtain? No, the curtain is already fully pulled. Just come in. And in fact, one of the business models that we want to launch in the future is a luxury manufacturing tours. So you can actually have customers come over, visit this beautiful town in Sicily where handbag manufacturers are making handbags, and then come and look at the manufacturing process and get a handbag. And it's part of. I believe the luxury now is also selling experiences. So this is part of that. I think it's just that's obviously something that you can, there are certifications around, your vendors, right? You can certify that they do things according to XYZ. There's relationships, and there's also the willingness of the business to be able to pull the curtain fully and let people in.
I would like to integrate one point for what you said just before, the tools for that luxury manufacturing that you represent. The tools is the best way. For where we are applied, we talk about automated factories. There, the tool is virtual. It's totally possible to send an notification to consumer and provide a webcam, for example, to show when the concrete order will be produced. No, one of things. Then I don't know about the legal aspect, no, what will be allowed or not allowed, but basically, again, automated factories, thanks to Internet of Things, can gather all kind of information. No, we yet didn't done it completely, but we work on it. We can gather and then present to consumers, or at least to the brand, even how much power every single machine has been used. How efficient it was, the nesting, the placement, the cutting of pieces in 2D, no, from a piece of leather. All this information can be gathered and then send it back. Then after how to where to show it or not show it, it's another point of choose. But all the information can be gathered and as a feedback from the manufacturing.
Yeah, I'm going to chime in here because these are three amazing disruptive solutions, and you're talking about the supply chains we got, which is what I deal with every day. There are lots of steps in trying to become a more transparent supply chain. The first one you've already recognized, which is there's market value in being transparent at this point, and it's pretty obvious what practices don't want any sunlight on them. That realization is actually pretty impressive to begin with. The first step in any big supply chain, whether it's climate or ethics, child labor, I mean, it's a huge issue in this room, I'm sure, in supply chains, is internally admitting that we have an intention to figure out what our exposure is to this problem. And then the next step is we should fix it. And then the step after that, maybe several steps after that, is we're gonna say that we're planning on fixing it. And then you fix it. And then you say you fixed it. It's a very long process that I think consumers think is like a light switch, but it's not. And if you look at like massive companies disclosing how they're changing their supply chains, they disclose at every point along that path, and that's great. Even though it doesn't seem like that first step has a lot of value, McDonald's says they want to get antibiotics out of their meat in 10 years. The fact that they said it out loud to begin with is massive. So if they want to get to child labor out of their supply chain, they should just say it in a meeting. That's a really big step. And then they say they're going to do it maybe publicly, if anybody's asking. But the fact that you're asking means the market is asking, and it's progress, baby steps. Yeah, questions in here?
Regarding, I guess this is maybe more for Andre, regarding the speed using all the digital tools to get either samples developed and also production. What are your thoughts about the displacement of the jobs, not just maybe here in the U.S., but with all the other countries? With factories, if they're using all this automated and they know, all the workers.
I think it's going to happen. Well,
yeah, exactly. But
everything that can be automated will be automated. Now, here in US, that's for sure, because it's the goal, and it's a modern country. But if we speak even about Vietnam, I've been just recently. There is the problem. No, there are too many people, and they can they can work for zero money, but still it will be automated. And automation is not only to replace people; it's to be able to build connected solutions. So with the humans, we cannot talk from cloud to human brain. We need some automation. So, I mean, that's surely the direction. Then how to rescale people, what to let people do. It's a complicated topic. If we enter now, we will never finish. Yeah, we totally understand that this automation will surely create operative problems and human problems. But all the rest has been automated now for thousands of times. Some time ago, we had to go to kill animals, to then cook them and to eat. Now we go to supermarket. I mean, that's just the development of the society.
But with localization and new business models coming up, I do hope, and I think we're starting to see that creates jobs, and there are new opportunities in a lot of those communities to do either similar or like work that will pay a fair, good wage and with good conditions. So hopefully, we'll see more of that.
So all of you kind of touched on all your different business, thank you. All of you kind of touch with all your different business models that there's going to be a pivotal change of moving from a push model in fashion to pull, right? So my question would be, it's understandable in a luxury market that that can be adopted, but is the mass market ready for that when you're thinking about your consumer?
My technological vision, if I can, it's very easy. For mass market, it will be a different manufacturing model. So we really will do everything additive way with the simple materials. While with the luxury, it will be a combined and hybrid and more complicated. But at the end, that's why full automation for mass market is a solution.
Please weigh in.
Yeah, no, I think it's already happening. You know, I think more and more of the what you define as mass market is asking for sustainability, right? It's asking to make, it wants to make the right decisions, want to do the right thing, you know, and I think it's gonna become, you know, I don't think this is ever gonna stop. This trend is ever gonna get reversed at any point. I think it's only gonna get, you know, amplified with times. So yeah, I absolutely believe that, you know, maybe right now is more of a niche, although it's not really. I think
I
it's
don't
just
think it
like,
is at
right?
all.
It's
No,
not.
the pull is already
So-
here. We're just not ready to
Exactly.
react to it. A lot of fast fashion companies are reacting. They're not
Exactly.
creating trends. They're reacting to them, and that's why the lead times need to cut in half right now. That's why folks are trying to do that anyway. So I think the influencer example, if anyone's rolling their eyes at influencers, you got to stop, because they create massive immediate demand, and they are setting trends now. So whether supply chains are ready to react to that pull or not, that's their decision.
Yeah, and especially that's a great point that you're bringing that up, because the reason why we started working with the influencer collaboration model is because we saw a lot of demand from influencers marketing to mass market, saying that, you know, they want to launch their own product line, but they want to do it sustainably, they want to do it ethically, they want to do it in a way that they can, you know, not be ashamed of. Because a lot of them were shamed for using, you know, shady Alibaba import products and marketing them as their product line, you know? And they were like, no, I want to do this the right way. I want to do this the way luxury brands do it. I want to do it sustainably. I want to be able to take photos, you know, in the place where my bags are made. So it is already like, it's already entered, you know, the kind of the mass market mindset.
Also, the best way to make consumers really angry is to create a really high demand product and not have enough of it. And I think if you're paying attention to influencer fashion, that's just the story of influencer fashion right now is, oh my gosh, we sold out in 3 hours. That's a manufacturing problem and a demand planning problem. And these kinds of options can make that not a problem anymore.
It's also scarcity, which is also one of the, right,
That too.
value props.
Can we take one more? I don't even, okay, good, we're taking one more. Yeah, from the far side.
So my question would be, how do you address Amazon? I've heard that 1 out of 7 products that Amazon has online that doesn't sell goes to a landfill. And how do you embrace them to join this this movement with fast fashion and you know, all the ways it's going on in the world?
I can only say one thing about Amazon. I don't know how many of you here know that Amazon has filed a patent for on-demand manufacturing. This is what is going to totally change the business of Amazon. Still, we consider Amazon a marketplace, a delivery service, or whatever, while the most critical thing that they're going to build in the future is to produce. So even Amazon, burn as a delivery, as a stocker, and so on, they feel this important patent. It has been recognized. Many companies I know I've been in contact are really worried about it. Basically, they patented an ideal way to sell from a catalog and then produce in a totally automated, optimized way with the local factories and so on. So Amazon is going to be a producer very soon with their private labels. Their private labels, as you know, they are based on data, on artificial intelligence, so they are already capable to create an ideal product for every single consumer, and very soon they will be able to produce it at a super low cost. That's going to be a big trouble.
Well,
At the same time, to shed a little bit of light on this, I mean, when you're looking at the Amazon issue, obviously they are a powerhouse and a giant, but being that big also inherently comes with a lot of challenges and problems, which we know large organizations have. They can't move fast and quick and nimbly and iterate the way a lot of startups and new business models can. And that in and of itself creates huge opportunities for us to do more faster, quicker in the technologies we're using, in the sustainable approach we're taking. Look, Amazon has tried before to get into kind of the B2B raw materials and fashion space. And maybe now with on-demand manufacturing it'll do better, but it has failed before in certain business models and in certain verticals. So we should not give up. And us, everyone in this room as a consumer, you got the purchasing power. You choose where you put your dollars, and that will make a big impact.
Just a second, let me integrate one thing. I totally agree with what you said. No, what is important and what is good is that Amazon is showing this trend, and it will accelerate, because otherwise we could speak for other 15 years about made-to-order sustainability. Once we see tomorrow the first complete end-to-end flow from Amazon, it means at a large scale, no, very effective, and then it may have the problems that you said, that and then at the end, it's not on Amazon that there is on the earth, of course, no? But they will really accelerate. They will show how it works. So everybody else who are still considering if doing or not doing this change must do it. No?
Yeah, there's one more thing about fashion specifically on Amazon that's really important to note when you're looking at the trends, which is last year was the first year that the largest apparel seller on Amazon was Chinese. The names are not that hard to recognize. And then the other thing is that the third-party marketplace is taking over Amazon sales. So Amazon is an enabler of this problem, but if you walk into a million Big Lots and, sorry, I did a brand name, and dollar stores in Manhattan, all the discount stores, they're a symptom of the same problem. So blaming the marketplace, which is now just a delivery mechanism for direct from China clothing that costs $3 and ships for free, they're no longer as relevant, in my opinion, to the problem itself. These guys on the stage can change the cost dynamics of the better supply chains that we've got, and then maybe make those items less competitive. I hate to have the last word, but we have lunch. Stephanie, please have the last word.
And on the flip side, a lot of people these days don't want to share their data with Amazon anymore anyway, so a lot of the enterprise customers we're working with refuse to let you be hosted on AWS or sell on AWS. So, I mean, there are negatives there too, and I think this is just the tip of the iceberg and the power of change.
How amazing are these individuals? Who is impressed and in awe of where our supply chains are going? I, for one, am in love with this space because of the massive disruption that's happening. It's not incremental innovations here on the stage. These are the disruptors that will define the future of your industries. So if you are not on board and talking to them now, you should be. They will be here for lunch. Seek them out. Yes?
Can I just say one thing?
Yes.
Can we not say digital disruptors, but digital enablers?
Enablers.
That's what they are?
Yes.
That's much better. That's more positive.
They are enabling the future that we all should be building for, but because business is driven by their bottom line, and unfortunately, I'll just speak truth to power, that we have this problem because the huge enterprise holding companies and brands are working with their C-suite who will be out of their organization in 3 years. So they don't care that in 5 years their company is going to be out of business because they didn't make the bold choices that need to happen now. So if you're one of those executives, please come and talk to our panelists. Make the bold choices. This is the future, whether you're on board or not. So thank you so much. We are going to take a break.